Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Centre for London's Countdown to Net Zero conference and our discussion today about green jobs for London. We're so very pleased to have you today at our first ever hybrid conference. This is a strange but delightful experience to be in a room with real people and also to have the opportunity to interact with you all today on Hop-In, which is our digital conferencing platform, which is open now and through the break at lunch as well for you to continue to chat and interact with each other. My name's Claire Harding, and I'm the Research Director here at Centre for London. In terms of the format for today's session, we're going to hear from four really brilliant and interesting panellists today about their views on what works for greening London's jobs. And then we're going to have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the session. And we'll try very, very hard to finish before 12 o'clock so you can all go and have your lunches. You'll also see if you're on Hop-In that there is a poll that's up at the moment about what you think are the priority actions for green jobs in London. So please do have a vote on that, and we will share the results with you towards the end of the session. You're also welcome to submit questions to the panel, which you can do on Hop-In, and if you're on Twitter, you can also do that on the Twitter hashtag, which I will just remind myself of, which is hashtag London to Net Zero. To introduce our panel, I'm really pleased to be joined today by Eman Martin, who's the Director of External Affairs, Government and Political Relations at Bosch UK. Hi, Eman, thank you for joining us. By Anna Markova, who's the Policy Officer on Industry and Climate at the Trade Union Congress. Roy O'Shaughnessy, the CEO of London's Capital City College Group. And last but by very means not least, Forogh Rahmani, who's the Senior Manager for Strategy, Policy and Relationships, Skills and Employment at the Greater London Authority. Hi, Forogh. I always find those GLA job titles really interesting but really long, so I do hope I got that right. As you've already said, people on Hop-In, please do submit questions through the Q&A function. You can upvote other questions as well if you like them. That's really helpful, so we don't have loads of questions. Instead, we just have a really perfect set of the questions that you as our audience think are the most interesting and useful. We're going to try and get through as many of those as we can during the session. And yes, please do vote on the poll, which my colleagues are putting up now, and we'll use that to shape the Q&A as well a bit later. It's always really great to hear what you think. I'd like to start with Eman today. A question for you. Is it possible for London to become a leading city in green job creation, and how do we go about it? And I guess as a sort of follow-up to that, what's the role of businesses and investors, I guess companies like Bosch, in doing this? Thank you so much, Eman.
Absolutely. So first of all, probably we need to step back a little bit and we need to ask ourselves why now we're talking a lot about green jobs and what's the reason for that? And of course, there's a movement there. The movement towards, the 10-point strategy announced from the government, or even the Green New Deal from the EU, has become the predominant idea for addressing climate change. It would involve a massive government investment, as you alluded to, in equitable decarbonization, which would create millions of green jobs. The impact would be this large, not only because greening the economy will be labor intensive across all sectors, but also because a green jobs guarantee would be required in order to ensure that all workers would be supported throughout this green transition. So this movement, if you like, for addressing the climate crisis present a unique opportunity to define the type of economy that works for everyone, not just one that moves away from extractive activities towards regenerative one, but also that is all centered on racial, environmental, economic, and intergenerational justice. And what the movement calls for a sustainable economy, one that, in short, meets the needs of people now and in the future. And if we look to the London economy, we're already starting it now. So this has a potential of 48 billion size of the economy in London alone. But also now, currently, we already have about 5% of the green jobs initiated already. And we're not only talking about jobs in retrofitting and installing, for example, in new products, but it's really also goes into the top of senior management. Why is that? Because we are not only talking about a new product range, which we will have available because of the 2050 targets which we need to achieve, but we're also looking in decarbonizing business in general. So science-based target, race to zero, allows actually to decarbonize, if you like, the business, but as well as our product portfolio. So you could imagine from all of that there will be lots of jobs generated. And, companies as Bosch or others, that means is we need not only to look into the new jobs what we're creating in this green economy, but how could we transition the current employees what we have in the traditional classic business to the new, if you like, era. And there we need not only Bosch as such, and not only other businesses, but we need also the local authorities, we need the GLAs, and we need also the national government to work together in actually allowing, first of all, the framework to be in place, the right policies, but as well as about attracting the investment, because we cannot expect that the public sector alone will be able to actually, if you like, allow the generations of jobs to happen, but also to get the right investors, ethical investors in place. And London is the best place to do that due to the legacy of course, the focus on financial markets, etc., and fintech economy. So we think as Bosch, we already actually started in generating these jobs, but we do think that there are lots of investments needs to happen, billions and billions, but as well as they have to be an ecosystem created between the public sector and businesses to allow this transformation to happen as soon as possible in the right way, in the ethical right way.
Thank you so much, Eman. Really interesting. And I'm sure we'll come back to that question about how the public sector and the private sector work together throughout our discussion today. Those of you who were at our previous session about decarbonising neighbourhoods may have heard some quite linked conversations about how we decarbonise our homes and who's responsible for that and how we work together on that. And if you weren't there and you'd like to watch it, it will be available shortly on YouTube for you to catch up. I'd like to pass over to Anna now. Anna, we know there are lots of opportunities for green jobs in London, which Eman has told us about, but there are also, I think, some risks and some threats. I wondered if you could reflect, please, on those opportunities and risks. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks very much for having me here. In terms of opportunities, so the Trades Union Congress last year commissioned some research into what green infrastructure projects, what jobs green infrastructure projects in the next couple of years can create, both in London and elsewhere in the UK. We were very much looking at this from the point of view of how infrastructure and green infrastructure in particular can be part of the kind of stimulus to come out of the economic crisis. And what we found was that in this kind of very short-term way, over the next 2 years, in London specifically, for example, retrofitting social housing could create 21,000 direct jobs and probably quite a lot of supply chain jobs on top of that. And similarly, building new social housing in a way that's energy efficient and up to date could create 26,000 direct jobs, and again, many more in the supply chains on top of that. And there's other improvements to be made as well that can be really jobs rich and that have really good potential for creating quality jobs. And that's improvements for walking and cycling transport. That's improvements to our rail network to make stations more accessible and linked up. And on a lot of these things, actually, London's already investing more than the rest of the country, but there's still more to be done. I think in terms of threats, I should be mentioning the potential threat to job quality, because a lot of the time when governments think about economic stimulus, when governments think about coming out of a crisis, you might be thinking about creating jobs as quickly as possible, and it doesn't really matter what kind of jobs they are. now we want to protect the job quality that exists. We want people to have access to good quality jobs. We want the infrastructure projects that are being carried out to make London ready for net zero to be covered by good collective agreements that implement the sorts of things that you see in Wales or in Scotland with the Fair Work standards. And we want to be able to ensure that green jobs are actually good quality, with decent pay, healthy, safe working environments, and collective bargaining with that. And I think in some of the emergent kind of green sectors, particularly less relevant for London, but in the offshore wind industry, but what's more relevant to London, perhaps in kind of waste processing, recycling, energy to waste plants. Some of these things, some of these aspects of job quality have fallen by the wayside. So what you could do as part of this green transition is you could end up replacing jobs in higher carbon operations in industries that have higher carbon emissions with jobs in these cleaner industries, but that don't have as much protection, aren't paid as well, are more precarious. So really what we need to make sure is that these jobs, the jobs of the future, are also jobs that people would actually want to work in and be secure in and have a good life in.
Thank you so much, Anna. So much interesting food for thought there, and I'm sure we'll come back to it. We're also really interested in Centre for London in how we create high quality jobs for people who work in all sorts of different ways. And it's a very serious challenge, but I think it's really interesting to link that challenge to the challenge of decarbonising our economy and helping our workforce into greener jobs. I'm going to move on to Roy now. For those of you who don't know Roy, and I suspect that many of you already will, Roy is the Chief Executive of the Capital City College Group, which is one of London's largest further education providers, and I think probably knows more than anybody about the challenges and opportunities in further education of London's young people and career changers. So, Roy, I wondered if I could ask you how you see the role of further education in London's green economy. I suppose a very obvious question, and also how we can, and Eman has already referenced this, how we can ensure that green jobs are attractive and accessible to a really wide range of Londoners in terms of gender, age, ethnicity, and other equality types as well. Thank you, Roy.
Thank you, and thank you, Eman and Anna. I completely agree with your comments. So we have 30,000 students across 10 centres in London, covering construction, hospitality, all sorts of different arenas. And the green agenda is changing so quickly, but at the moment we don't have a skills forecast of that's linked to the funding and the opportunities in the future. So even though we're absolutely committed to keeping our curriculum in all as fast-paced as the changes in the green agenda, it's not as joined up yet as it needs to be for institutions like our own to be able to really shape the student of the future to those jobs. So one of the things I would say is we really do need a skills forecast that is linked to the funding and planning processes. And I also think that, as Eman was saying about all this new jobs and all that will be created in the future, as those new products come out, there'll be a drive for these new skills. So it's absolutely critical for employers and the FE sector to join up in a way that allows us to be thinking 4 to 6 years ahead on these job structures, because the students are there, the commitment's there, the passion is there. It's how we actually get that. I'm just going to use one example of what we're doing currently just to set the tone for this. So you may not be aware, the audience, that we have a restaurant in our Victoria building that's 100 years old, would be rated very, very highly if it was a professional restaurant with 3 stars and all of that. But because it's run by students, it cannot be. There is no waste from that restaurant whatsoever. Everything that is used, anything that's left over is composted. That compost is then used to grow herbs, vegetables, and salad items. What we don't use, we have agreements with all of our suppliers that if they don't adhere to this, we won't work with them, that it goes back through the suppliers, back to the farmers. who originally grew the project for the thing. And it's a virtuous cycle. And the reason why I say that is hospitality is a huge part of any green economy. And every restaurant and every little takeaway in the country could very, very easily be doing what the Victoria Centre has been doing for years and years in making sure there's absolutely no waste from that. And it's the same with the construction. We have a construction area academy. We have a railroad, big railroad contracts with the private providers. And we try and make as clearly as possible that it's got to be sustainable. And as Anna said, that it's got to be the right jobs. There's no sense just creating very low-level jobs that somebody can't be sustained. We want a sustainable green economy, but we don't have a sustainable future for the individuals working in it. So we try and bring those things together. We've made an absolute key strategic aim in our new strategic plan to become sector leading in environmental sustainability. We completely accept, because of our position in London, that if we don't lead by example, if we don't show it can be done with our 1,700 staff, our 30,000 students, then it's very, very hard to convince a local store owner across the street from one of our centres to buy into our environmental practices and standards. And we're going to focus on three things initially, just to make absolutely certain that everybody is together, is reducing waste in landfill, conserving our use of resources, and then reducing our carbon footprint. And you might say, yeah, that's pretty basic. But actually, if you polled all of our students, I don't think they'd all say those are the three priorities. So what we're trying to do is bring absolute clarity to every FE student, offer a pathway for them to participate, encourage their own innovation in this, but absolutely start from the basics, that in our own community, we're not wasting anything or creating to not allowing that carbon neutral economy to be created. So I'll stop there and be happy to take questions.
Thanks so much, Roy. It sounds like we all need to go to your colleagues and students' restaurant at the Victoria Centre. And it's a dangerous thing to be talking about just before lunch, isn't it? But yeah, lots of really interesting things to talk about there, and possibly some things we'll want to pick up on in the rest of the discussion. I'd like to come to Forogh next, please. And GLA, of course, very central to this agenda for London. So I wondered what you think that the priority actions are for London government, for local government, and for central government to make high quality green jobs available now and in the future. I know that's a really big question. I hope that's okay. Thanks, Forogh.
No, and thank you for having me at today's event. Obviously a very important agenda, and as hopefully many of you will know, clearly, achieving net zero carbon by 2030 is a massive ambition for the city and a big priority for the mayor. This has obviously come at a time where we're being hit with a really kind of difficult economic context. London is seeing one of the most highest unemployment rates across the country. And I think together this is obviously strengthened calls to build a low carbon, fairer economy. This is obviously really crucial, not just to the mayor, but London government as a whole. And jobs is huge in terms of ensuring that Londoners can access skills, they can access opportunities, but also there is huge momentum to look at how we can support the green agenda, support that job creation, and ensure that Londoners have access to those opportunities. I think from a kind of London government perspective, and certainly from a skills perspective, just speaking to some of the points raised by colleagues earlier, particularly Roy, I think he's absolutely right to say, what is the skills forecast for the green economy? It's equally a very new area for the GLA, which has taken on responsibility for adult education in London. And that's around £330 million per year that we currently spend, that's provides training through colleges and institutions like Roy's, delivering really critical skills to adults. And this is more important now than ever before when we think about the kind of challenges that we see in terms of jobs changing, the changing way that we need to work, and the pandemic has clearly shone a significant light on that. We have been doing some initial analysis to try and understand that forecast, and certainly to provide some framework to our institutions about where those skills needs are, and looking at some of the jobs that are being created. And I think picking up on some of the points Eman made, that's not just about new green jobs, it's about greening jobs. And that is a much bigger challenge not just for the organisations that are looking at that, but how do you change and bring that cultural shift? And that's not just for businesses, that's for children, that's for young people, that's for parents, that's everybody in the system to understand what changes we need to make. What we have identified is that there's occupations that we're looking at, certainly in 3 core categories. We're looking at green, increased demand, so increasing demand for existing jobs by greening them. So that doesn't necessarily change the content of those jobs, but does change the way in which we kind of work in those sectors. Green enhanced skills, so greening changes in the context of existing jobs to a varying degree. This could also change the demand for some of those jobs, particularly when we think about plumbers, heating engineers, financial advisors, and then those kind of green, new and emerging jobs. So these are new occupations as a result of greening, which are things like environmental professionals, carbon audits, EV charging points. What this is telling us is that, you know, we're looking at a very, very wide and varying context for different jobs. So how do we provide that clarity? I think there needs to be join up between government, business, education to work together. And that's why the Mayor has committed to launching a Green Skills Academy for London, where we can bring different partners together to help identify where those jobs are, what are the skills to support those jobs, and how do we promote and raise awareness to children, young people, adults, potentially who are looking to change careers or who are looking to reskill to access those opportunities. There's also, the other things that I'd just like to say is that there's obviously a kind of critical need for government to lead the way and lead by example, and I think that's really important in the context of all of this. And certainly what we would like to see from the Green Academy is some of the innovation as well. We don't necessarily have all the answers, but I think to see some innovation in terms of how we deliver on some of these skills, needs and ambitions will be really, really key as well.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. We at Centre for London have found the GLA's descriptions of different types of green jobs really helpful to our own thinking about this work. So thank you for doing that. And we're looking forward to seeing more as skills audits start to emerge. It feels like one of the greatest challenges here is, you know, I have a very young child. I have absolutely no idea what sort of jobs will be available to him when he's older, which is both very exciting and really quite mind-blowing. I think as long as it involves either trains or anything with wheels, he'd probably be pretty happy. We're going to come to audience Q&A soon, but first of all, I'm going to use my privilege as chair to ask some of the questions that I'm particularly obsessed about at the moment. It's the great thing about getting to chair these sessions. One of the things that we've been hearing from Londoners who are currently working in higher carbon sectors is that they're really frightened about this, and they're worried that they might lose their quite high quality, high paying jobs and be forced into lower quality, lower paying jobs. And we hear a lot of discussion about a just transition. And I would argue that part of a just transition is meaning that people don't lose out for doing the right thing and for decarbonising their lives and their work. And that particularly applies to the people who have the least to lose. Anna, I wondered if you'd like to address that point from a TUC perspective.
Sure, yeah, thank you for that invitation. Just transition is obviously central to how the trade union movement thinks about the need to decarbonise, and I think there are a couple of things that are sort of key to our approach to this. One is that worker voice in decision making is absolutely crucial. So every employer right now will need to be thinking about, okay, what's our plan for net zero? How do we, what's our business model? What's our organization going to look like in 2030, 2040, 2050? And doing that look ahead. And what's really important is that the workforce is involved in those conversations, you know, either through a recognized union, or if you don't have one, then through some other kind of formal consultation process. And what happens then is, you get new ideas. So workers are obviously doing their jobs. They know best how to, what's actually going on in their working environment. They will know some of the kind of simple changes that can be made to go quite a long way towards those targets. For example, union reps in some theatres that I've talked to recently have saved their employer tens of thousands of pounds in lighting costs, in electricity costs for lighting, by switching to a different lighting system. So things like that, when you consult your workforce, they will know. B, what happens when you consult your workforce is that you can make a plan for skills. We've been talking about the need to reskill, upskill, and so on. Some roles will need to change. Some roles will no longer exist, and we acknowledge that. Some roles will no longer exist in 2030 or 2040. And what needs to happen is a plan for what's going to happen to that workforce, what opportunities can be created in order to make sure that that transition is just and smooth for them. One non-London based example of a good story about this is EDF's closure of Cottam Power Station, which happened a couple of years ago, where the company consulted really early on with the recognised unions in the workplace, and together the employer and the unions made a plan over 3 years of closing the station, how they were going to offer every worker a really meaningful choice around whether they would relocate to a job somewhere else within the company, whether the company would provide training for a different role, and every worker was offered that individual support. So those are some ways that every employer can do this. And just to finish off on the kind of broader political scene, it's crucial that this kind of approach of partnership between employers, workers, organisations and government appears at every level of decision making. So we'd like to see on the level of London, on the level of London boroughs, these kinds of task forces or commissions or whatever you want to call them, that can come together between employers, workers, government, perhaps skills institutions as well, so that planning can be done in a really joined up way.
Super, thank you, Anna. Forogh, Anna just talked about the need for this to be coordinated at different levels. I wondered if you'd like to tell us a bit about what the GLA's thinking is on supporting people to transition out of high carbon jobs into lower carbon jobs.
Thanks. I'll just echo what Anna has said. I mean, the move towards a greener economy will lead to change across a number of sectors and occupations, and there probably will be impacts on certain jobs more than others. And I think the definitions of what a green job is and how you green that is equally important, and getting some, I guess, coordination, as you say, between government, business, and certainly education providers in terms of how we work together will be key to that. Because this will likely include a number of professional, associate professional roles as well. The skills requirements for those different jobs will vary, no doubt, and some workers in some roles may need new skills, enhanced skills, and that all needs to be considered. There's also, as you said, there will likely be some workforce challenges where there is less of a need potentially for new green skills, and the shortages of those skilled workers will be a kind of clear issue. And I think that's where our kind of planning work around how we work with businesses, and equally the businesses that we commission and have responsibility for, when we think about responsible procurement practices as an institution, as the GLA group. How do we work with our own supply chains to ensure that what they do has considerations for environmental impacts and supports the workers of those institutions? Certainly the Mayor's Good Work Standard is really important as part of that, in terms of how and what we would encourage businesses to do to respond to this kind of challenge. And of course, as I said earlier, the Mayor's Green Academy, the Skills Academy, is really important for us as a step toward coordinating our efforts with local government, with business, with education, with the unions, to ensure that people working in those sectors or people entering those sectors are getting the skills and support they need to progress within their jobs, as well as move into other sectors. And I think transferable skills are also really important when we think about skill sets. There's a lot of skills that are going to be important in whichever sector you move or progress within, and I think these need to be considered as well. The other thing that I think we need to think about is around incentives. Sometimes we need incentives in order to encourage and make change, and that's certainly something that the Mayor has been pushing for with central government, and has taken a step himself to think about how we build that into his mission around creating a Green New Deal for London. So, for instance, setting policy targets and providing large-scale funding to support some of that. So these are the sorts of things that we would equally like to see national government take action on.
Super, thank you very much. You're being an absolutely lovely panel because you keep all kind of gently segueing topics into the next question I want to ask. We're going to move on to audience Q&A now. We've got some questions in already, which is absolutely great. But I just want to say at this point, I know it can feel really intimidating, like typing your question in to a blank box and like wondering whether it's an intelligent question or not. It's possibly even more intimidating than sticking your hand up, and that can be pretty bad. So we want to hear from you if you are the world expert on green jobs and you have an incredibly complex and technical question for one of our panel. But we also want to hear from you if you're new to this topic and you're just exploring it, and you're thinking about stuff that doesn't seem obvious to you. There really are no stupid questions in this kind of event. So please don't feel intimidated about asking a question. We really would love to hear from you. Our first audience question is for Roy, although possibly other panelists will want to come on as well. So other panelists, please have a think if you would like to, and then wave if you would. What are the core skills that you think the emerging green skills sector needs to develop? And in particular, is it technical skills or soft skills or a balance of both of those things?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. I think that goes back to what Forogh was talking about earlier about how we get the skills audit, and it's still quite early in the process. And I should say that from a college perspective, GLA has been absolutely brilliant with working with us on not only this, but the whole apprenticeship development, the whole adult education budget and things like that. I think the way we're looking at it, just because this might not be a comprehensive enough answer or a good enough answer, but we're trying to focus it around our STEAM jobs. So those that are in the fields of science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. And so until we get greater clarity. So we've taken those and we've said that those areas will be absolutely central to London coming to terms and staying up on the green technologies as the world goes forward. And so we've used that as a core strategic driver as a cornerstone of our curriculum for this. And we're trying to do it in several different ways. Some are more experimental. Some of you might have seen the 01 Founders Ed thing, which is a program on digital that's just being launched in London with some private providers and some others. And it's a completely innovative model. You don't need any background in training. You come into that. 2 years later, you're a fully stacked qualified software engineer, and you start at 55,000 a year with a guaranteed job, right? So there's those kind of way out examples out there. But if we were putting it down in practical terms, we're trying to get our learners to get into jobs that are already existing in those STEAM areas that I've talked about, the science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. So preparing the learners for that. We're expanding the courses that we're offering as we get more information from GLA and employers as to what they need. And just as an example, that whole innovative software 2-year program came out of the fact that most young people are incredibly familiar with gaming, and somebody could have been kicked out of school at 11 or 12 and is absolutely brilliant at this, and they wouldn't consider a job in this. So you actually qualify for one of the 250 free places by just going online and doing the game. And if you get through that game and you get to the end, then you get an invitation to go into a process. And at the end of that, 250 jobs, training for 2 years, absolutely free. And then the third one is we're really trying to develop and promote the technical and higher education pathways that will allow not only you to get into the entry-level job or the second or third level, but progress up through that, not by having to go back to university or anything, but by actually being able to progress through practical courses in the college. So as I said at the beginning, it's probably not enough detail, but that's how we're trying to approach it at present.
That's really, I'm still on mute, I'm off. That's really interesting, thank you, Roy. I feel that giving enough detail on that would probably mean that we were still here having really interesting conversation about technical skills requirements, probably way through lunchtime, which might be very interesting for us, but quite annoying for our audience. So thank you for keeping it fairly short. Before I come on to our next question, would any of our other panelists like to contribute on this question about what skills we need to develop?
I could probably be precise about Roy did a good job. STEMS is definitely the right way moving forward. Just to break it down, we have here direct and indirect jobs. The indirect jobs is actually related to the whole digitalization, AI, quantum computing. We see as an industry, we were actually calculating that we will reach half of the peak of the digitalization in 4 years in 2019, but actually that has been escalated due to the lockdown and COVID, that we are looking 2 years period. So the digitalization and automation leads to the whole discussions about 5G, which is allowing the communication between machine to machine and robotic revolution. That brings us actually to the direct jobs. And again, what Anna said is how could we actually transition these workers who are actually in the traditional jobs to these jobs. So reskilling is really very important. But I would like to point out that I could understand the fear of these workers, because automation will definitely lead into 80% of manufacturing will be automated. So you actually, the kind of worker skills what you have now are really not needed in the coming 5 years. So that's why we need this transition period to happen, and we need reskilling so we are not leaving anyone behind. And I will give you an example for that. So for example, in the automotive sector specifically, if you look to the combustion engine, for example, petrol and diesel. So before, in one component, you needed 10 workers. For the electrification engine, you need 1 worker to none. For the hydrogen engine, probably you need 6 workers. So the intensive of work is actually changing. And the means is, from the industrial perspective, specifically Bosch, we need more academic, and we need more STEMs, software engineers, and actually, Roy, the salary is what we are looking at. So for example, if we're looking about engineers for automated driving technology, which we are now, we think in the coming 5 years, we will need about 10,000 jobs only Bosch. The salaries now, and maybe we'll encourage more students to study that, is about 250,000. And there are no enough people to get, which is interesting. So therefore, what I'm trying to say is that there is a direct and indirect, and both fields will generate greener jobs anyway for the future. One point is definitely what I find, and actually was proven in the recent polling questions. Majority of the people don't really understand what is the net zero carbon about. And we talked here about 2 days. So I talked about 2050 targets, because for me as an industry, this is the end of the journey of the decarbonization and starting with the net zero carbon 100%. 2030 targets are actually the targets for some of the companies to achieve the net zero carbon race to zero, to decarbonize itself by 2050, the end of all. So your products needs to be net zero, your life needs to be net zero, everything has to be net zero. So I think there have to be lots of education also to the public, what we do mean with these greener jobs and also net zero carbon economy.
Thank you so much. That was a really interesting point. And I think it's interesting to link these questions about decarbonisation with the question about automation, because it seems from what you're saying that they're interacting in some very interesting and quite complex ways. I'm going to come on to sharing poll results in a second, but our next question is such a nice segue from this one, but I can't quite resist asking it now. You've talked about kind of understanding what green jobs are, and the public understanding, all of us understanding what we need to do to decarbonise. And this came up in our last session as well, very strongly. And someone in the audience has asked how we ensure that the push for green jobs is genuinely green rather than greenwashing. And I guess the risk of greenwashing is that much greater when there is that lack of overall understanding about what we need to do to reach our net zero goals. Quite a tricky question, but I'm very grateful if anybody in the panel would like to give it a try. Anna?
Way to put me on the spot. I think it is hard because who's the main authority on what constitutes a good net zero plan versus what doesn't, there's several levels to this. I think we've got the official climate change committee, which sets targets for government and reviews government progress on creating the policies that are needed to get there. And the most recent report from Climate Change Committee is that the UK government is definitely not doing enough. While they're setting the right targets, not enough policies, and certainly not enough of the public investment that's needed to get us to net zero is there. So I think there's a really strong role for the Climate Change Committee and other kind of independent bodies trusted by the public to review whether the commitments made by governments and other institutions are real or not. And I think the other thing is the role of social movements, and I include the trade union movement within that. I think workers and broadly the public needs to get involved in scrutinizing these plans, and needs to the kind of education effort that we're talking about. It also goes backwards. It also goes to public scrutiny of when a certain company or a certain local authority are saying we're aiming for XYZ. Does it actually make sense? I think it's important to foster an open culture where the research that those targets are based on is public, and where there is worker involvement, public involvement in scrutinizing those plans.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks so much for... Roy, please.
Sorry, I was just going to add to what Anna said there. I think that there's this incredible push by the young generation for this agenda, but they will become disheartened if it appears that this is just a greenwash. And I think that's maybe behind the heart of this question. And it goes back to what I was saying in the beginning, that we have to be the change now. We can't be saying, oh, it should be this, it should be the GLA, it should be this. Each of us have our part to play. And so as a college group, we have a target for the next 3 years to halve our waste to the landfill. We know at Victoria it's 0, right? But we have 9 other centres, other programs and all of that. That's to halve it, and then to at least save 25% on our carbon emissions across the group, energy and all of that. And I'm very aware that Sweden has absolutely no landfill any longer, right? I was there in 1980, and your bin for your waste was this size that you could put out that the company would give, but every house had a complete set of recycling things. That wasn't just the 3 or 4. And as of 2 years ago, Sweden has 0 landfills. So I think there are very, very good examples around the world, different parts. Nobody's done it properly yet, but the KPIs that we can put on ourselves are there, and each of us just needs to take those and set the example on it.
Thanks so much, Roy. Always good to hear a shout out for Sweden. My grandmother was Swedish, and I always enjoy hearing it praised as a country. I'm going to come back to that poll question now that we asked you as our audience earlier in the session about what the most important things we need to do are to get green jobs right for Londoners. And interestingly, by far out ahead on this is that we need to support research and development for new green technologies. And I guess that sort of speaks to what we're talking about, but we've also been speaking a lot about existing technology. So maybe something that panelists would like to reflect on as they answer and respond to the next questions. Again, our next question from the audience, very much picking up on the topics that Roy and Anna were speaking about. And I should say thank you very much to Anna for agreeing to be put on the spot there. I thought that was a really great and inspiring answer to what could have been quite a tricky question. So thank you. So building on that, our audience member has said there's an enthusiasm in young people for green jobs, and I'm sure we've all seen that in our careers, in the young people who we speak to in our own lives, in our colleagues, in our families, in our friends. And how do we utilize this? And the follow-up question to that is, do we need to prioritize their knowledge enhancement, in which case I guess we speak to Roy, or their skills, or indeed do we need to enhance the jobs available? And when you're reflecting on that panel, I'd also be really interested in reflections on how we make sure that this works for all young Londoners, rather than just say assuming, which I sometimes hear, that all the green jobs are going to be in construction and retrofit, and those are nice jobs for young men. So it'd be great if we could all think together about diversity and inclusion as well. Forogh, I wonder if that's something that I know the GLA does a lot of work with young people and a lot of research, whether that's something that you'd like to comment on?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I think it's really, really important. I mean, there's what we understand is that many critical skills that are needed for net zero can be learned on the job. So I think that's really important to acknowledge, and things like apprenticeships, as Roy mentioned, are going to be really key to that. As Eman said, the skills and the skills needs for these jobs will change significantly, and the digitization of jobs is accelerating that. So those transferable skills are going to be increasingly important. I think going back to the awareness point, there is a lot of momentum, and it's great that so many young people are pushing this, but we still need to ensure that all people, all Londoners, have a good basic awareness and understanding of the reasons for and the challenges of climate change, and why do we have this kind of ambition for reaching net zero. Some of the things that we've been thinking about is, should net zero become a basic skill alongside English, maths and digital? It should just be embedded in what we do. And I think education from a very young age is really important to that. We've been doing a lot of work with our careers providers in London. So we fund careers hubs, and this is where businesses work with schools, colleges. And as part of that, we've been developing a green virtual work experience programme to support careers advice in schools. So really trying to get in there early to help educate not just young people, but teachers, careers planners, in understanding what does this actually mean. And I think from a diversity and inclusion perspective, it's really important that we think about that, because in many of the traditional green jobs that we kind of look at now, there is a huge underrepresentation of women. They're very male dominated. It's also an aging workforce. So we have to think about how we get young people and underrepresented groups interested in the types of jobs that are available, and help raise awareness of the range. You know, it's not just those predictable jobs. Actually, when we've been talking about it today, there's existing jobs that will likely have a greening element to it. So it's really important that we look at that, otherwise we will risk further gender imbalances in these fields. So I think to ensure that green jobs, we can help to ensure that green jobs are attractive, we need to have really strong career support and advice to help inform young people from early on about the opportunities available. We need employers to play their part and look at how they approach their recruitment practices, particularly reaching women and groups from other Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups. And we need to ensure that Londoners who are transitioning from a job into another job, or who've been recently made unemployed, can consider opportunities and are aware of the opportunities available in the green sector. And there's certainly an intention from the Mayor to launch a promotional campaign to promote jobs in the green sector. And that is certainly a commitment that we're making as we kind of launch our Green Academy programme.
That's great, thank you. And we're definitely looking forward to hearing more from the Mayor about what he'll be doing in this sector. It feels like what I'm hearing from the panel today is that we need to show that there's a huge range of green jobs that are available for different people, and that those are jobs for everyone. I wonder, Eman, if you'd like to comment from your experience as a big employer of many, many Londoners, on how you make these jobs attractive to young people and how you make them attractive to a diverse range of people.
It's a great question. I like actually what Forogh also said about diversity and encouraging more girls into STEMs. We really now, especially in the male-dominated technology industry, we are just tapping into the half of the talent pool, and we need actually to encourage more girls to come into it. I think it's really important as an employer. We are having lots of problems of finding talent, and in a European level, for example, we already exhausted the marketplace. So what I'm trying to say is that we're trying now to engage in a schools level to encourage actually the younger boys and girls both in going into STEM. So for us, it doesn't really matter now if you title green or not green. We will have to be green. So for the greenwashing question before, it's actually, sorry to say that, but it's nonsense, because we are obliged through the Paris Agreement by 2050 to be net zero carbon. So there is nothing out of it. What we need now to just make sure of as a community to really start with ourselves to be net zero carbon, because this is the first step moving forward. And, you know, the businesses, you know, Bosch has already achieved scope 1 and 2 to be net zero carbon last year by 2020. And we are now actually trying to decarbonize our supply chain. So there is nothing about greenwashing. And therefore the jobs are happening. But what I'm trying to say is now currently, because of the tight and tight line what we have, I think now we just have to encourage young people really to study STEMs and to study engineering, science, anyway, any sort of science. Of course, software development preferred, because in the future, we will have more focus on software development, and actually the hardware will be given complementary to the products. And that is a shift in the thinking. So you see also traditional companies, including Bosch, for example, that we are not anymore coming from the hardware side of things, but are actually going to the software, following Google and Apple. So therefore, from that side of things, our priority is software engineering, and it doesn't have to be titled with green. I think the green economy, like Roy and Anna and my other colleagues and Forogh also said, we have to now educate it in school. Net zero economy has to be educated in schools, and that will be complementary then to the software development, engineering, or any actually science engineering moving forward.
Thank you. That was a fascinating response. And I think while we could allow this to go on all day, I really must allow our audience to get to their lunches and to take part in the discussions on Hop-In. So I'm going to wrap up the Q&A now, and apologies for not getting to quite all of the questions, but I think it was really good that we had the chance to explore some of those from a number of different angles. So thank you very much to all of our panelists for working with us on that. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you all with us and to have you as part of this really important conversation. I'd like, of course, to thank the sponsors of our project, of this conference, the major sponsor, Uber, supporting sponsors, KPF, whose lovely building we are in today, and the London Borough of Hounslow, and our exhibiting partner, Living Streets. I will be back with you in just over an hour with the absolutely brilliant and fascinating Kate Raworth, who's going to give our keynote speech. I'm sure you already know Kate Raworth, economist and thinker on donut economics. I think it's going to be really interesting. I hope to see you there. And until then, please do use the networking area to come and meet up with us and with other conference delegates on Hop-In, and to visit our virtual expo. Thank you very much again to us.